There is a war. It's happening now. It will decide the fate of humanity. The time to choose sides has come. We are the resistance. We are the info war.
Welcome to the InfoWars Nightly News. It is Tuesday, September 16th, 2014, and I'm Leanne McAdoo. Here's tonight's top stories.
Tonight, Obama pledges 3,000 troops to fight the Ebola threat. Then, the crackdown on Christians in Saudi Arabia. And McCain's mad that others don't hang out with his terrorist friends. That's next on the InfoWars Nightly News.
Meanwhile, John McCain, if you believe it, with real Al-Qaeda, with the Al-Qaeda Brigade, it's actually called the Bin Laden Brigade, that leads the Syrian forces.
Obama has announced there will be boots on the ground after all. Now, of course, the enemy that the president has sent our troops without hesitation to go fight is the Ebola virus. Now, the U.S. has pledged 3,000 troops to West Africa, including engineers and medical personnel, to build 17 treatment centers with 100 beds each. They're going to train thousands of healthcare workers and establish a military control center for coordination of the relief effort, of course. Now, Obama's announcement marks his second within a week of new mission for the U.S. military. This was following last week's speech outlining a broad escalation of the campaign against the Islamic State militant group in Iraq and Syria. So once again, we have a humanitarian crisis that the U.S. must rush to solve. And of course, since it's for humanitarian means, the U.S. has a moral high ground. But we all know this is about getting a backdoor into Africa. Even after all of these years of exploitation, this is a country still rich in natural resources and so much more. Just like we saw with Iraq and Afghanistan, basically, what they're wanting to do with Syria, destroy this country in order to save this country. And let us just remind you that on the top of the Bilderberg agenda for this year was Africa's challenges. So we knew we would be seeing a lot more presence by the globalists in that country. So here we are with all of these headlines. So Obama is saying that he wants to send troops to help counteract this humanitarian crisis there in West Africa. But what about the crisis at our own border? Now, depending on who you ask, there is no threat at the border. This is what's being spouted off by the Department of Homeland Security. They say there is no credible intelligence to suggest that there is an active plot by ISIL to attempt to cross the southern border. This is according to the New York Times. It was declared in a written statement by Homeland Security officials. Now, here Nimmo points out that Democrats are attempting to spin the warnings issued last month by government insiders. We reported that in August, Judicial Watch cited high-level sources in the federal government stating ISIS would cross the border very soon and launch attacks. They had very high-level government insider sources saying that they were hearing radio chatter, but that is actually kind of a bingo point there. Here, if you go directly to the New York Times article, what the New York Times reports is that Democrats say opponents of President Obama are simply just playing on concerns about terrorism as part of their attempt to portray Mr. Obama as having failed to secure the border against illegal immigration. And there it is. Aren't the president and his fellow Democrats doing the exact same thing, except for downplaying the threat of terror because they want to pass immigration reform? So they're accusing the right of upplaying the terror. They're downplaying it because they really need to just go ahead and, after November, pass this sweeping immigration reform. And once that happens, then they can go ahead and ramp up the terror threat at the border because, as Rob Dew mentioned earlier on the radio show today, they're probably just going to go ahead and do away with the border altogether. And then this will give them the excuse to terrorize us in the streets with MRAPs and heavily armed police force because it's for our safety. Now, one of the top liberal talking heads, Cenk Uygur, he is of the Young Turks, he says that he would bet money on Rand Paul becoming the next president of the United States. That's right, this is a top liberal voice saying this. He notes that Paul was a voice of reason on the issue of ISIS, saying that the Kentucky senator's opposition to bombing Syria arming so-called moderate rebels and intervening in the region stood in stark contrast to Hillary Clinton beating the war drums in line with establishment Republicans. Now, Hillary Clinton has repeatedly floated the erroneous talking point, one that's echoed by Rhino Republicans, that Obama's failure to arm the Syrian rebels during the first phase of the uprising was what led to the emergence of ISIS. Now, we know in reality, ISIS grew in strength as a result of being bankrolled and armed by America's closest allies, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Jordan. Now, in addition, many of the weapons that were sent to FSA rebels were also seized by ISIS fighters. But hey, Hillary Clinton, she's going to go on this campaign to just say, let's keep on doing the exact same thing that we were doing and hope this time it works. And I'm not talking about arming the rebels. I'm talking about voting for a Clinton again, or a Bush for that matter. Now, indeed, just how will the U.S. decide which of the rebels are the good guys? Now, Congress is expected to vote this week on giving the Obama administration the authority to combat the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria by providing arms and training to someone, but whom? There are vast differences among Syrian rebel fighters. It's a conglomerate of varying ideologies, social backgrounds, and loyalties. And the questions of who exactly is a Syrian moderate and whether these weapons will fall into the wrong hands loom large on Capitol Hill. A senior fellow with New America's International Security Program said one of the problems is that whether or not someone is fighting under an Islamic banner or a Syrian revolutionary flag, they're often working together on different fronts. If they're fighting to take over the military base or airport, different groups ideologically predisposed will be fighting together. And that's exactly what we've reported before. Rebels admit that they are working with ISIS. They say they have all the money and the power in the region, so of course they're working together. And this is an old adage, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And that is why voting to fund the rebels without a clear indication of who is with us is impossible. And of course, this is why Obama is ever so thankful for those beheading videos, because he says that it's got unprecedented support, which will help Congress go ahead and give him what he wants on Thursday. But joining forces is exactly what's happening. Here we have a report saying powerful al-Qaeda branches in Yemen and North Africa have issued an unprecedented joint statement Tuesday calling for jihadists in Iraq and Syria to unite against the common threat from a U.S.-led coalition. They urge their brothers in Iraq and Syria to stop killing each other and unite against the American campaign and its evil coalition that threatens us all. And we have reports also of Syrian rebels and ISIS signing a non-aggression agreement in which they promise not to attack each other because they share a common enemy, and that is the Syrian president Bashar al-Assad and his Alawite regime. So it's okay to arm them because we all have a common enemy, right? We want to take down the President Assad there in Syria. But they just kind of want us to forget that eventually we're going to have to then go ahead and fight them, ISIS and all these other rebel groups, to get them out of the way so that the West can do whatever it has planned for the region. But we're not, and when I say we, I mean the government there. I don't mean me, but we're not so great at figuring out who is our enemy. Who is our friend? I mean, basically, it all comes down to money and politics. Consider this. In the past month, a group of radical Islamic extremists based in the Middle East have beheaded at least 23 people, and they've enforced a ban on Christianity by arresting a group of people for practicing the faith in their private home. Now, I am not talking about ISIS, but it's the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, one of America's closest global allies. Now, of course, the West, they want to hype up their anti-Christian bigotry and their humanitarian issues when it suits them and their status quo message. But the true driver of U.S. foreign policy can be summarized with just two words: corporate profits. Now, just look at some of these headlines. Saudi Arabia passes new law that declares atheists as terrorists. Meet the U.S. allies. Saudi Arabia passes draconian medieval laws to crush dissent. Saudi man receives 3-year prison sentence and 450 lashes for being gay. Saudi human rights lawyer and activist jailed for 15 years for free speech under new anti-terror law. And of course, what's all in the news right now is the 2 congressmen pushing for the release of a 28-page document showing Saudi involvement in 9/11, and of course the ties to the Bush family as well. Now, this article is reporting that 28 people were rounded up Friday by hardline Islamists in the region, and this was all for practicing Christianity in the privacy of a home. There are millions of Christians in that region, but Saudi Arabia is the only nation-state in the world with the official policy of banning all churches. This is enforced even though there are over 2 million Christian foreign workers in that country. Saudi Arabia doesn't tolerate public worship by any other religion other than Islam, and they systematically discriminate against its Muslim religious minorities. They don't allow political or human rights associations, and despite all of that, Human Rights Watch notes that Saudi Arabia is a key ally of the U.S. and European countries. The U.S. didn't publicly criticize any Saudi human rights violations except through annual reports, and some members of the U.S. Congress have expressed skepticism about Saudi's policy priorities, but the U.S. concluded a $60 billion arms sale to Saudi Arabia, which is its largest anywhere to date. Now, this is from the Washington Post, and you can see in the article right there, Secretary of State John Kerry meeting with the U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia. Now, they say that long an incubator of the Salafist ideology that is now inflaming the Islamic State and militant groups like it. The kingdom has grown increasingly concerned with the destabilizing chaos that IS has wrought in their region. So they basically share the same ideology. But this doesn't mean that its state ideology is necessarily changing. The country is notorious for its draconian laws, which are derived from a strict Wahhabist interpretation of Islamic doctrine. Saudi Arabia is conspicuous in being the sole country to regularly carry out beheadings. Beyond the grisliness of the method of punishment, observers also point to the unjust ways in which those who face death penalties are found guilty, saying the execution of people accused of petty crimes and on the basis of confessions that are extracted through torture has become shamefully common in Saudi Arabia. But here we have Secretary of State John Kerry right there walking right alongside our closest ally, one of our closest global allies. It's not about humanitarian issues. Here we're pointing out that Saudi Arabia is more extreme than ISIS. They've beheaded more people than the 2 journalists that we've seen in the videos that ISIS has released. But Saudi Arabia is our closest ally, and it all comes down to money, corporate profit, and greed. And perhaps, of course, that's why John McCain was trying to spin his visit with ISIS last year, where we had pictures where he was like hand in hand with the extremists there, because he's basically saying to know these extremists and to have met with ISIS, that's a good thing. Any potential presidential candidate should be able to claim that they have met with terrorists, much like Secretary of State John Kerry is meeting with them in Saudi Arabia, because our closest allies are there helping us in our reign of terror across the globe. Now, coming up, Paul Joseph Watson is going to be joining me via Skype to break down this story around McCain as well as many others. And of course, the threat of Ebola requiring boots on the ground. Stay with us.
Celebrate the spirit of freedom and liberty upon which our nation was founded at InfoWarsShop.com. Molon Lave is ancient Greek for come and take it. This popular design combines both classic Greek Spartan imagery with modern M16 assault rifles. Now available in women's tees and proudly made in the USA. Celebrate the spirit of 1776 with the George Washington brass belt buckle or this incredibly sharp-looking 1776 hat. Badass. And be sure to check out the new arrivals at InfoWars Life, where you can prepare your body to perform at peak levels with Survival Shield, Nascent Iodine, Super Male Vitality, and Fluoride Shield. And wake up, America. Immune Support Blend is the healthy choice for the gourmet coffee lover. So get incredibly high-quality, freedom-based products and help fund the revolution at InfoWarsShop.com.
City of Austin tap water versus filtered City of Austin tap water. I can like taste dirt in it.
God knows what's in this.
This has an aftertaste.
Tastes like Austin water? Yeah, it does. Ugh.
These people just sampled City of Austin tap water straight from the faucet. Next, we had them try a sample of tap water filtered through the ProPure G2.0 filtration system.
High quality H2O.
That one is better.
Tastes like nothing.
Yep, I know what good water tastes like. It's good water.
Most tap water contains added substances like fluoride, chlorine, Monsanto's deadly pesticide, glyphosate, and many others. Studies prove that these substances are linked to an assortment of major health issues, including tooth decay, lowered IQ, and even cancer.
It tastes like you're drinking out of the lake when you're drinking tap water.
Yeah, there's that processed flavor to it.
The ProPure G2.0 filtration system removes these deadly substances and many more, leaving only fresh-tasting, deliciously clean water.
Okay, this is very tasty.
It's good water.
Refreshing.
It's good.
Go to InfoWarsStore.com today. Use promo code WATER and save 10% off your ProPure purchase. Again, that's InfoWarsStore.com or call 1-888-253-3139.
Joining me now to break down all of these stories of calamity on the global scale is our foreign correspondent and writer, Paul Joseph Watson. Paul, thank you for joining us today. So we'll just get right into it. You've got a bunch of articles up on Infowars.com. We'll start with this one. Top lib. I'd lay money on Rand Paul being the next president. What about you? Any bets?
Well, I mean, the point that Cenk Uygur is making of the Young Turks, and that's a pretty big show, you know, over 2 billion views on YouTube. So that represents a large slice of the progressive liberal audience. And he's saying that the 2016 presidential election will come down to a face-off on foreign policy because this tactic of the Obama administration of airstrikes against ISIS and arming so-called moderate Syrian rebels to fight ISIS will be, as it has been in the past, a complete disaster. Because you're going to have Rand Paul, who has steadfastly said, and he recently said it again on CBS yesterday, that arming these extremist rebels, and as Tony Schaefer said, 80% of them are radical jihadists, is going to backfire, because we know that people like Hillary Clinton, people like John McCain supported this exact same policy in Libya, arming radical jihadists aligned with airstrikes. And of course, in the case of Libya, it was a complete and utter disaster. The country is now a failed state. It's been overrun by radical Islamists. You've got black people being put in concentration camps. Any enemies of the warlords of the terrorist gangs that are running Libya now are incarcerated, tortured, or killed. And that's exactly what's going to happen in Syria. In fact, if the US government had armed the rebels back 2 years ago, ISIS would now be in control of Damascus. And people like Hillary Clinton and John McCain are pushing for this yet again, even though we know, for example, just a couple of days ago, FSA, so-called moderate Syrian rebels, signed a ceasefire, a non-aggression pact with ISIS. There are also numerous examples of them not only defecting to ISIS and fighting alongside ISIS, but actually giving weapons to ISIS. And in fact, I put together quite a lengthy article on this last week. I think it was called Obama Plans to Fight ISIS by Arming ISIS. And in that article, I point out, for example, this quote from an ISIS fighter called Abu Athiya, who told Al Jazeera, quote, "We are buying weapons from the FSA. This is the FSA that Obama now wants to rearm in order to fight ISIS." This is an ISIS fighter saying they buy weapons from the FSA. "We bought 200 anti-aircraft missiles and concourse anti-tank weapons. We have good relations with our brothers in the FSA." So ISIS and the FSA, and the numerous other examples of this, are fighting alongside each other, are exchanging weapons, and yet Obama has now announced that he will give more weapons to these radical jihadists. Again, 80% of them in Syria at least are radical jihadists, aligned with ISIS in some cases, fighting alongside them. Rand Paul comes out on CBS and basically says it's a disastrous scenario. The same thing that happened in Libya is going to happen again. Hillary Clinton, who of course vehemently supported the attack on Libya, laughed when Gaddafi was killed, and John McCain and other Rhino establishment Republicans are standing on the opposite side of the debate. When it comes to 2016, Rand Paul is going to be on the right side of history, which is why the Young Turks host said he would lay money on Rand winning against Hillary Clinton in a potential runoff in 2016.
Right. Well, it's going to be very interesting to see when they go head-to-head and how they're able to spin these erroneous talking points when people can actually see with their own eyes the failed policies and Clinton saying repeatedly, well, we should have armed them in the first place and now we've got to arm them now, when Rand Paul has consistently said that the issue is that they're receiving these weapons anyway. They're being handed over to ISIS. It's also going to be interesting to see how, that they're going to spin what McCain has just recently come out to say. We saw those pictures floating around with him meeting with ISIS, and now he's basically using that as an attempt to scold Rand Paul. Let's take a look at what he said.
Has Rand Paul ever been to Syria? Has he ever met with ISIS? Has he ever met with any of these people? No. We're going to have a fight because it's patently false. This is the same Rand Paul that said we didn't want to have anything to do with anything to do in the Middle East, by the way. I don't want to get in a fight with him at all. Yeah. But it's not true. I know these people. I'm in contact with them all the time.
Let me ask you this.
And he is not. And he is not.
So McCain basically goes on Fox News and makes a gaffe, says that Rand Paul isn't qualified to speak about ISIS in Syria because he didn't meet with ISIS. Of course, McCain meant to say FSA rebels, but then again, as I just discussed at length, many of these ISIS or these FSA fighters are aligned with ISIS and have given weapons to them. McCain met actually with FSA rebels who had kidnapped Lebanese pilgrims, and according to some sources, McCain encouraged those rebels to keep those Lebanese pilgrims hostage in order to further the US's geopolitical agenda at the time. So he was basically meeting with terrorists, and now he's chiding Rand Paul for not meeting with terrorists. I mean, not a lot of what comes out of John McCain's mouth makes sense, and this is another flagrant example of that.
Right, and we've got all of these situations going on now in the Middle East, also now in Africa, and you've got an article out about a Chinese PLA professor basically saying we could be looking at a third world war, and he's there warning about this situation over Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah, I mean, extremely concerning. Again, this is out of the People's Daily, which is basically the organ of the Chinese Communist Party, the ruling regime in China, and he's a PLA professor at a university, and he put out an editorial today which basically says China needs to be prepared for a third world war, which could break out as a result of the crisis in Ukraine and the tensions between the United States and Russia. He basically goes on to say that the next world war will be about sea power. Obviously, we've seen Obama announce the US's pivot to Asia, and it will also be fought on the front lines of the internet, cyber warfare and things like that. So again, we've seen Russia and China moving increasingly closer in recent months. They recently started work on a $400 billion gas deal from a pipeline from Russia to China. We've got the BRICS countries announcing their own anti-IMF money system. We've got them building their own internet outside of the spying purview of the NSA. So the BRICS countries are building a multipolar world which stands in stark opposition to the unipolar system being advocated by NATO, the US, and the European Union. And of course, Ukraine, whose government was installed via a coup instigated by the US and the EU, is a central flashpoint in this tug of war between the BRICS countries and the NATO countries and the United States. So extremely concerning that a top PLA university professor would come out and say the threat is there for a third global conflict if NATO, if the US and the EU continue to escalate this situation with Russia and Ukraine.
Right. I mean, it just seems so strange that they continue to poke the bear that just so happens to have nukes. I don't understand. Seems like that's what you not want to do.
It's amazing. And, the senior Russian Defense Ministry official came out last week and said that Russia is now going to change its military doctrine to treat NATO as an enemy, and that preemptive nuclear strikes would be justified against NATO. Because, they see themselves being encircled by NATO, by these missile defense systems that are being readied for countries like Romania. And all you've got to do is look at a map and see that that's exactly what's taking place. The agreement at the end of the Cold War was explicitly for that not to happen. Now NATO is going back on its word, encircling Russia, increasing hostility against Russia. Despite the recent ceasefire with Ukraine, they actually intensified the sanctions against Russia. So rather than walking it back and trying to let cooler heads prevail, the EU and NATO countries intensified those sanctions to prod the bear even more. So they're really acting like little infantile children right now. Again, calmer heads need to prevail because it's a genuine threat, as you said, with Russia being nuclear armed.
Right, and basically this warning that the conflicts in Asia are going to rise, it seems like chaos is just descending over the entire planet. Now, earlier this year, of course, we reported on Bilderberg and their agenda, and obviously the Asia pivot is one of those things, but also on the topic was Africa's challenges. Now, at the time, I was thinking, no one ever talks about Africa. The U.S. is never concerned with all the genocide that has gone on there. Now, all of a sudden, this is at the top of their Bilderberg agenda. And we see that Obama has now said he does want troops on the ground there in Africa. So what's going on here? Are we seeing sort of a slow creep into that country? Obviously, humanitarian crisis is an excellent way to get boots on the ground there.
Well, the situation with Africa is, of course, again, it goes back to the BRICS countries. It's a tug of war between China and the United States. China is invested to the point where their investments total more than double the United States in Africa. So they've got most of the infrastructure, the resource contracts for what is obviously a very poor country and represents a huge lucrative opportunity for whoever is allowed to develop it. But the United States has the far larger troop presence there. In fact, I don't think China has any troops there apart from UN peacekeepers. So I think the United States is attempting to accomplish what it couldn't via economic deals, which, again, Obama attempted to push last month at this Africa summit, by using occupying troops, which, of course, they have a lot in the region under AFRICOM. And now, as you said, similar to the Coney 2012 scam, which was kind of a failed attempt to justify U.S. military intervention in Africa, we might be seeing it with this Ebola thing. The other point about it, of course, is the sanity of sending 3,000 U.S. troops into an area ravaged by this virus, which now top experts are saying could kill 5 million people amidst speculation that it may have gone airborne. We know that it's mutated. So the logic of sending 3,000 U.S. troops there, obviously you could understand sending, CDC workers and first responder emergency health personnel. But the logic of sending U.S. troops there has been questioned by many. And as you said, it could well tie into the U.S., the Obama administration's economic and military designs on Africa's resources.
Well, exactly, because sending that many troops, it's obviously pointing to the potentiality for a huge crisis this has. But we also have the issue that Obama just recently changed his authority to now be able to detain any Americans. So here you're sending in 3,000 troops. Now, if any of them do come in contact with this disease, they can be detained. Are they going to be able to come back into the country? It just doesn't make any sense if you're looking at it from a purely disease control type scenario.
Well, exactly. I mean, similar criticisms were heard when they brought the American doctors back to Atlanta who were infected with Ebola when the same treatment was available in Africa. There was no real reason to bring them into the country. Then, of course, you've got the story we covered yesterday, which is the fact that the State Department has ordered 160,000 hazmat suits specifically for the purposes of dealing with Ebola, an extremely high number given that the amount of CDC and American health workers in Africa at the moment is basically, I think, in the hundreds. So to have them order 160,000 hazmat suits seems like they're getting very prepared for something. Whether the American people will receive the same level of information about the preparations they need to do remains to be seen. The CDC's been very coy about Ebola sufferers in the United States, which is partly understandable to prevent hysteria. But again, it's interesting that they've ordered such a large amount of hazmat suits. So again, top experts, saying that the cause for Ebola in Liberia and Sierra Leone is lost, that it's just going to infect the entire population and millions will die. Hopefully that doesn't happen. But the fact that top virologists in Germany are saying that is of extreme concern.
Right. Well, and also no one is talking about the fact that they are working on Ebola as a bioweapon right there where the outbreak occurred. We reported before how they issued a report saying they may have been responsible for this particular outbreak. The U.S. holds a patent on a particular strain of Ebola. So it's all sort of curious timing.
It's curious, yeah, but you don't see the rush to, vaccinate everybody in the United States and Europe like you did with swine flu, which is something I've pointed out before, because the difference is they already had the vaccine lined up and they sold it on the hysteria when in fact swine flu wasn't really a danger to healthy people. So we didn't see that in the case of Ebola because there was no lucrative profit motive behind it. It seems to a certain extent, as long as it's just black people in Africa being killed by this, there's no real urgency to solve the problem, which is what other experts have said as well.
Absolutely. Well, Paul, thank you so much for joining us today. It's always great to get your point of view. We'll be seeing you soon.
Thanks, Leanne.
And you can find many more reports and articles by Paul Joseph Watson by becoming a member of Prison Planet TV. You can find all of our reports there, as well as instant access to The Alex Jones Show and the nightly news, as well as movies. And your username and password can be shared with up to 11 people at the same time. And of course, it is your contribution, your support that allows us to bring you all of the news that you crave. Thanks for tuning in tonight. We'll see you here tomorrow at 7 p.m. Central.
You are watching the InfoWars Nightly News, which airs 7 p.m. Central at InfoWarsNews.com. Members can share their passcodes with up to 11 other people, and your support is helping us defend liberty worldwide.
You've experienced and heard about the benefits of super male vitality. Now, the new formula has arrived. Introducing the new Super Female Vitality. I have specifically designed this formula to help the body naturally regulate itself without the use of artificial hormones. Key ingredients chosen from the highest quality sources. Secure your Super Female Vitality today from our limited stock at InfoWarsLife.com.